Here's a video of Bertrand Russell speaking to future generations, speaking to us. Let's watch the video and then we'll talk.
Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
I should like to say two things. One intellectual and one moral. The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you would wish to believe or by what you think would have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts. That is the intellectual thing that I should wish to say. The moral thing I should wish to say to them is very simple. I should say, love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things that we don't like. We can only live together in that way. And if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet.
What I find most remarkable about his speaking is its organization. Bertrand is remarkably orderly in his thoughts, and he does this intentionally with specific sentences. His answer to the question is, he says, I should like to say two things, one intellectual and one moral. He tells us how he's going to go about ordering his thoughts. And then he starts with the intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you're studying a matter, and he presents his perspective on being unbiased in ferreting out the truth about anything, which I think is a very pertinent message to our society today. And then he proceeds to cap that thought by saying, that is the intellectual thing I should wish to say. The moral thing I should wish to say is very simple. These transition sentences, these bridges between thoughts, are very clear and very identifiable. I noticed that Bertrand also utilizes a rhetorical device known as the thought kernel. The thought kernel is this. Say what you wish to say in the most succinct way using the fewest amount of words. That's it. You communicate straight away with simplicity so that theoretically the person could walk away and have a very low resolution understanding of what you wanted to say. Now, that's not to say what you wish to convey does not need unpacking or doesn't deserve further elaboration. But you are intentionally being very clear straight away. This is called the thought kernel. And Bertrand does this by saying, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. That is a very succinct summation of what is to follow. And the next 3 or 4 sentences is him expounding upon that point. And when he goes into the moral argument, he says, I should say this, love is wise, hatred is foolish. It's an aphorism. It's a very pithy, concise way of encapsulating what takes him another minute to elaborate on. But the way that he says it sticks in the mind of his listener. And now they have a filter through which they can interpret what is to follow. It's a very brilliant but unbelievably simple way of communicating. What I also find commendable in the way that Bertrand communicates is that he is so sure of his words. He speaks without stammering, stuttering, or stumbling through his sentences. And that conviction, I suppose, can only come from a sure belief in his message. And I'm sure one that has come through realizations that have arisen through lived experiences. There's also another sentence in what he says that I want to highlight. He says, "Never let yourself be diverted, either by what you wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficial social effects if it were to be believed." There is a musicality and a melody to that sentence. And I've noticed this in some of the most gifted orators and speakers of the 1900s, is that we often ascribe articulate sentences to sentences that are difficult to compose or difficult to pronounce. They are often a form of verbal jiu-jitsu. It's word gymnastics. And oftentimes, I've noticed this as well, and I have a running list of these such words. There are words that you can employ in your speaking and default to that elevate what you say to a coherent thought, to an articulate thought. Words like perhaps, I suppose, I should like. I should like was very common in the late 1900s. I should like to say two things. Even if you watch interviews of children from the 1950s or 1960s, they begin with, I should like to say that I feel at home in this environment. Bertrand uses the word were, if it were to be believed. Most would say if it was believed or if it was to be believed, but he says were. What I also find interesting is that his moral point, the moral thing that he wants to say about tolerance and loving each other as a fundamental pillar to how we can thrive as a human race, is a very timeless message. And it almost makes me think, and I'm sure some of this is true, that we perpetually always deal with the same issues. Because this is 1959 in which this interview is recorded. And his words are no less relevant today as they were in, apparently, 1959. We often think we're different from the past because of select technical innovation or because we are more enlightened in some way, religiously, scientifically. But our human nature is always constant. And I say that to make the grander point that it will always be important for us to revisit words like this.